how would you describe your attachment to or personal relationship with God? And Jesus and Mary can also fill this role. So if you want to talk about it from more than one, like with God, Jesus, Mary, or just stick with one of them, that's fine too.
Sure, no problem. I think for myself, all three are related. So, you know, I think, you know, we learn about God at a very, I learned about God at a very young age, and my parents taught me about God, and so, you know, when I was young, I understood God to be someone who was very loving and very kind and always good to us. And so as a child, you tend to believe what your parents are telling you. And so, you know, a lot of times you don't get challenged by that attachment until you get older and you come into some type of crisis of faith. And you know, there's stories within the Bible that talk about that, and the one that comes to mind the most, and probably is the classic example of kind of our attachment with God and that we fall out of attachment with God, is the prodigal son. So we know God when we are young, and then we come to a point where we have a crisis of faith and we fall away from God. And then it's usually through that crisis of faith that we either once again come to an understanding and a knowledge of God, but now in an adult sense, or we turn away from God and we reject God. So fortunately, for myself, it was knowing God as a loving God, but not in an experiential way, just believing it because my parents had told me that it was right, and then getting to be a young adult and wanting to experience kind of what the world had to offer me and the pleasure that it had, and realizing that there had to be more to life than that, and then coming into an adult relationship with God that not only believed because my parents told me, but now it was in experiencing God through prayer, through circumstances in our lives, where now we begin to see, or where I began to see, that God actually did love me and cared for me. So now it became real in my life.
Okay, wow, you answered a few of my questions within that response.
Sorry.
No, that's great. So, I guess, do you feel that you like turn to God during like certain events, such as like frightening, alarming events, illness, injury, like experience separation and loss? Do you feel that?
I think people are more prone to turn towards God during those times in their life. But the place that I am now in my relationship with God is that it's my most important relationship. There is nothing more important than my relationship with God. Not my wife or my family, though they are related to my relationship with God. But when my relationship with God is in order, when I'm spending time with God every day through prayer, keeping God in my thoughts, trying to live out my day, and trying to, trying not to just please God, or trying not to say, well, if I don't do this, then I'm going to offend God, but to do things throughout my day because I love God. And that's when I think our relationship begins to mature, that I'm not going to just run to God because something tragic has happened in my life. I enjoy spending that personal time with God every day. And because of that, when those storms come into my life, when tragedy or those things that you listed come into our lives, it's a lot easier to deal with them. There is a kind of a peace that is present even in the midst of trial and suffering.
Okay. So you would say that, is your relationship with God different than other relationships? Such as, like, family, different than your relationship with your friends?
Not really, because God is my family. God is that perfect Father. And now for myself, and understanding a relationship with the Father is easy, because I had a father who was loving and kind and faithful, and who really taught me about how much God loves me. So I view my relationship with God the same as I view my relationship with my wife, with my children, with my neighbor, with the person who is the hardest to love in my life. Right?
Okay.
They're all related, because the gospel says, whatever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do unto me. So if we can start looking at everybody like that, right, then that's how life-changing God can be, that it permeates throughout all of our relationships. I once was reading an author one time, and he said, think about the person that you love least in this world. And he said, that is how much you love God. The person that I love least, because it's in the least of people, the ones who are hardest to love, right? God is present in them. We have to remember that.
Okay. So my next question would be, would you consider your relationship with God a positive one? And you might have answered that, but if you want to expand it on.
My relationship with God is, like I said earlier, it is the most important relationship that I have, because everything that I do flows from that. All my decisions that I make are based upon my relationship with God. So it is the most positive relationship that I have. And the nice thing about a relationship with God, or I could say my relationship with God, is that it makes sense of things that the world says is terrible. It makes sense of times of suffering in our lives, in times of trial, and all the things that the world says you have to avoid. You have to, if something terrible happens to you, then you probably made a poor decision, or you must have done something to deserve that. But when, as a Christian, your life is a real paradox. That, Jesus, when he came, he suffered and he died on the cross. And that's a hard thing to imagine, that God actually suffered and died on the cross for us. So suffering has great value. And now we're living in a society that says that, suffering and things of that nature, don't have any value at all. In fact, they're meant to be really avoided. So that's how positive that relationship with God is. That it can take what is awful in the world and turn it into something wonderful.
Okay. My next question would be, do you ever feel as though there is a lack of reciprocity in the relationship with God? So giving but not receiving, like
Yes.
a lack of balance there, I suppose?
Right. I do. And it's all on my part. I feel that God gives me everything, that God gives me every breath that I take. Every movement that I make is through God's grace. and yet I don't return to God what is good. I am sinful in my nature. I fail. I fall. My actions sometimes say that maybe I don't believe in God as much as I should. So yes, I do feel that there is not a reciprocity, but it's all on my
But
part.
on your end rather than...
Oh,
Okay.
yes, exactly. Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. All that I have, we're sitting in a home today that, is our business, and all of it came from God. God gave all of that to us. And it's not that we deserved it. It's that we were faithful. We believed that God could do it. And it happened.
Wow, awesome. Okay. And you might have answered this a little bit, but if you want to expand, how did you become attached to God? So, when did it begin?
Well, I think my attachment with God, like we said earlier, it began as a child because there was faith in my home. Now, and that doesn't always mean that because there isn't faith in a person's home that they're not going to have faith someday, because we do see many examples, even in countries that are atheistic, where people rise up and become great Christians and great believers in God, whether the Muslim faith or the Jewish faith or the Christian faith. I'm speaking from a Christian aspect, but there's great value in all religion. So it began there, and then like I said, but that's kind of like it's kind of like your childhood relationship with God, right? Your parents tell you it's right, so you believe that it's right?
Yeah.
So then you come into a crisis, like maybe your parents told you there was a Santa Claus, but then you finally realize there is no Santa Claus.
Yeah.
At least not in the traditional sense.
Yes.
So then you have a crisis because you can't see God the way that we see one another, right? Faith is believing in what we do not really see or fully understand. So then, it was more as an adult, even past like all the adult initiations within the church, First Communion, confession, confirmation, where really you are sealed with, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and now I'm an adult within the church. But you're 15 or so years old, and you're like, when's this thing going to get over here? So for me, it was when I had a crisis, and I can remember it as clear as a bell, that there was I was sitting in church one day, and I was about 19, and I just thought there has to be more to this life than what I am seeing. And so I left university and I went to live in Toronto with my brother, who was a person of what I consider great faith, and I told him I wanted to come and just live with them, and I wanted to seek out God. And I did that, and I had an amazing conversion experience in my life as a 20-year-old man, and that was it. From that day forward, my life was changed forever.
Oh, wow.
And I knew there was a God. I no longer doubted. I no longer needed to hear it from my parents. No longer needed to hear it from anyone, because I knew there was a God. I had experienced God's love in my life, and it was in a very powerful and real way. And I can say this, I was 20, I'm 46 now.
Yeah.
But yet I look at that moment as such a pivotal moment in my life, where yes, God became real, right?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there's times where you kind of wax and wane, right, in your faith. That's part of growing and maturing. And it was funny, we just canonized St. Teresa of Calcutta, and when we look at St. Teresa's letters, like the